Thank you, Rahul, for taking some time out of your day to join us today for this short interview. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you came to the United States originally, and what you've been doing in the U.S. before you decided to explore making an EB5 investment?
Absolutely. So my name is Rahul, and like you alluded to, I was born in India, and I'm still an Indian citizen. I came to the U.S. As a student for my undergraduate degree. I ended up getting an undergrad in finance, and right after that, I was fortunate enough to work for a year. But then, with all the H-1 regulations and things of that nature, I went back to getting my master's. I ended up getting my master's, and then I joined a software systems integrator as a professional, and it has been about 9 years that I've been with them. As far as choosing an EB5 investment route, I just felt that would provide my family and I some certainty, especially with India being one of those two backlogged countries for employment-based visas in different categories, except for EB1. I believe that's also now backlogged. So we felt that that would provide us with a little more flexibility and certainty with our lives in the U.S.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. Were there other visa options that you considered other than EB5, or was EB5 really the only one that kind of fit what you were looking for?
I think EB5 met almost all our criteria. A couple of the options were to perhaps, go back to India and come back later on, but that just didn't make a lot of sense because, again, then you were starting a new life. Although we're Indians, it would still be a brand new start to our professional careers at least. So then we were like, okay, with EB2 not moving anywhere as far as the dates were concerned, we thought let's just go with EB5. Especially after last year's regulatory change, where they brought in the rural, EB5 rural, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in later on here. But that definitely was a big influencing factor in our decision making.
Got it. So tell us a little bit about how you became familiar with EB5. Like, did you hear about that from a friend years ago, and you kind of were following it, and then you saw the rules change? Like, how did you go from knowing nothing about EB5 to deciding to explore making an investment?
Actually, that's exactly what happened. So one of my really good friends, or actually one of my wife's really good friends, had invested in an EB5 project. He just texted me out of nowhere, says, "Hey Rahul, let's grab a bite and we can discuss a few other things." We weren't even going to talk about immigration related items. And then from there on, he dove into what they did with their EB5 journey, and this was prior to any changes with like regulatory changes. Regional centers were still operational, and then we didn't really think about it at that point. But then later on, like I said, when that new set of regulations were put in place, we were like, okay, maybe now that the dates aren't moving and we want to, we know that we're going to be in the U.S. for rest of our lives, why don't we look into EB5? So that conversation was the first, I guess, first time that we thought of EB5 being a legitimate choice for us to or a legitimate path for us to take, and that's how it all started.
Got it. Okay. And so when when was that? And then after that, after that decision to really pursue the program as a viable option, what were your next steps? What did you do after that next?
Yes. So that would have been right before COVID. Yes, I believe that was right before COVID. And then as far as the answer to your second question, last year I contacted, so we started thinking about, with EB5, and anybody that's looking into EB5, they very well know that proof of funds and source of funds is a massive, massive undertaking, right? So making sure that you have that sort of almost put together before you even do spend a lot of legwork on finding a project is necessary, right? So my wife and I sat down. We said, okay, let's look at what our financial situation looks like. And then from there on, we started looking at different projects. We also thought of doing something of our own. So EB5 direct projects were definitely something that we thought about with hotel construction or things of that nature. But then we came back to EB5 rural, and that's what we ended up investing in.
Got it. Okay. And so before you really started a lot of the research on the projects, I guess, how was your experience finding an EB5 immigration attorney? What did that process look like? How many attorneys did you talk to? And obviously you've done some research on source of funds, requirements before that, but yeah, just tell us a little bit about your experience going through that process.
Absolutely. So our attorney search process began with just a regular search syntax, EB5 immigration attorneys in the U.S., right? And from there on, we contacted about 3 different attorneys. We had pretty in-depth consultation with 2 of them. And then obviously, Sam, you definitely, you remember this. I had reached out to you as well, and that's when you put me in touch with one of the attorneys that we ended up sort of engaging with for our project.
Got it. And how was that experience? Once you hired the attorney, what did that process look like? How much work was it, and how long did it take to kind of get all those documents and records together?
Yes. So we ended up, and a big shout out to Anahita George. That's the law firm we ended up, or that's the attorney and the law firm that we ended up retaining for this work. And as far as, so the first couple of calls itself, my wife and I felt that she and her team would be the right fit for us. The main thing for us at that point was how confident she was, and she was able to provide references that we did double check with. And number 2 was how comforting she was with us as far as this whole journey, because this was pretty new to us, and she really put us, in that state of like, okay, don't worry, don't be nervous or frustrated. This is what's going to look like, and this is how we're going to tackle one thing at a time, right? As far as the timeline, I believe we were able to wrap up everything from retaining her to actually filing everything in about two and a half months. I mean, a little fewer days. I think it was right around 60 days is when we were able to get everything wrapped up and filed.
Got it. Okay. And I guess having just gone through that process pretty recently, what suggestions or advice would you have for someone considering to do EB5 with respect to hiring an immigration attorney? What do you think are kind of the most most important questions to ask and things to look for, for someone picking an attorney to help them?
Yes, yes. So, I mean, I can give a slew of items to think about, but I think for us, the biggest three or four items were: number one, how is the attorney communicating with you, right? I mean, do we always have to go through their secretary, or do we have open lines of communication with the attorney or their partner? So that was huge. That was a big thing for us. Secondly, their track record, obviously, right? Anahita and Nick, her partner, whenever we talked, we felt that they had such a strong grasp of the subject matter that we felt that, okay, you know what? Whatever they say is going to end up being the right choice or right path for us to take. Number three, again, going back to communication, how available are they to you, right? Because a lot of times, and I know people with layoffs and everything, I know a couple of them really well, like firsthand, that went through EB-5, and they weren't able to get their filing done in a timely manner, mainly because the attorney and their law firm, they weren't available to them, right, at all times. So that was a big factor for us. And then just the ability, and the best part is both Nick and Anahita are so analytical. I believe Anahita even has experience as a tax attorney. So the understanding of numbers and how can we communicate as to arrive to that source of funds document was very important to us. So I think these are the 4 or 5. I mean, communication to me was such a huge thing because I was traveling a lot, and I was they would still get back to me even on weekends sometimes, right? So that was a big factor for us.
Got it. Okay, that's super helpful. I guess on the other side, what you mentioned, you talked to 3 different attorneys. What was it about kind of the other 2 that made you feel less comfortable compared with Anahita?
Right. So if we were to include Anahita, I spoke with 4 in total. So I would talk about the other 3 that we didn't end up retaining. 2 of them just gave me that sense of a big law firm feel, right? And again, I feel that this is such a life-changing event for anybody, not only because the number is such a large number, $800,000. That's not an easy peasy number to gather and collect. However, I feel so that was number 1. Number 2, because it's immigration related, I think it's also a life-changing event in that sense. The 2 of them were very big law firm type, and I felt like I would just not get that customized, personal attention that we would need given again the uncertainty, getting that kind of money put in together, things of that nature. Okay. Now the third law firm was just they were just not ready. Maybe they had a lot of they had taken a lot of clients, compared to how much they can actually work on, right? So their bandwidth was so tight that we felt that their response just with setting up a call took 4 weeks or 3 weeks, right? And that's not something that we felt comfortable with.
Got it. Okay.
Whereas Anahita, I still remember I was driving and she quickly answered and we started chatting, and that was that. So yes.
Perfect. Yep. Responsiveness and just ease of communication is absolutely critical, because this is a multi-year, relationship, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And like you said, with layoffs and with other things happening, timing, can be very important.
Correct. Yes.
Great. Okay. So we'll shift gears a little bit now and chat a little
Sure.
bit more about the projects, right? So obviously, source of funds, path of funds, that's one large piece of the puzzle. And the other major piece is what project, and then with that, what regional center the project is going to be affiliated with. So can you, before we jump into specific projects, maybe tell us a little bit about what your kind of mindset was, and how did you go about looking for potential projects and regional centers, and what was important to you at the beginning, and then as you saw more and more projects, what became more important to you as you kind of got more comfortable with the space?
Yes. With EB5 rural, that was a pretty novel concept for us, and we didn't think about EB5 rural to be even an option for us, right? Mainly because when you think about large projects, even before I'm talking about like regional center projects or somebody investing a lot of money in a massive infrastructure deal, they're usually brought up in an urban setting, right? So rural wasn't even we didn't even think about rural. So then we thought about the targeted employment areas, which could be rural, which could be urban in a way, depending on what is classified. So a suburb of a large city could still be considered as TEA approved project or approved area versus, and you still get that massive population of a suburb of large city, right? So we were looking at that, and then Anahita sort of said, okay, you know what, there could be, and this was again prior to Anahita, but Anahita sort of hit it for us, as in she cleared all our doubts. So when I was looking at EB5 rural, Twin Lakes being one of them, I wanted to make sure that we work with a project that is sponsored by, or that is basically brought in to the market by a large developer, right? A large successful developer. And then when we started talking to Anahita about backlogged, visa categories and rural getting 20% set aside, that basically, was one of the main reasons why we said, okay, you know what, it is worth taking that risk in a rural project. And on top of that, when we learned more about the Twin Lakes project, after speaking with you, her, just me doing our due diligence, we felt that, the risk is completely minimal, if non-existent at all. So that's when we went ahead with the Twin Lakes.
To summarize, it sounds like you were really focused on rural going in, which is great. And so, from that perspective, once you kind of knew, okay, I definitely want to be in a rural project for the faster processing, the larger visa set aside, because you're from a country where there's been backlogs in the other visa categories, historically. Once you kind of focused in on rural, what were some of the aspects of the Twin Lakes project compared to some of the other rural projects that you looked at that made you feel more comfortable with Twin Lakes versus some of the other rural options?
Yes. The brand name associated with Twin Lakes project was a big yes for us, right? When you hear about Coulter and just the amount of undertakings they've had, and decades of track record of completing successful projects, never defaulting on a loan, or an EB, or any sort of funding for that matter, was a big thing for us. And I remember at the very last, when we were ready to transfer or wire the funds, we were getting at the very last 5 or 7 spots available, if you remember that, Sam, our discussion. So we definitely didn't want to lose our opportunity to invest in in Twin Lakes. That was number one. Number two, so brand name was number one. Number two, just the track record of sales, right, within the Twin Lakes project. Because when I signed up with EB-5AN, we were getting periodic reports of different projects, and Twin Lakes being one of them. And I was looking at like how they were constantly selling and getting bookings for their houses, right? So that was number two. Number three, with speaking with you on numerous occasions, and Anahita, we got that sense of confidence that okay, these two professionals were being in their respective areas of expertise for a number of years, and if they are talking so highly of this project, there must be some merit to the spiel, right? It wasn't just a sales pitch at that point. So I think these three were, and then obviously EB5 rural, it being a rural project that's ready to be invested in, so that we can get our EB5 petition out was a determining factor as well.
From the immigration side, obviously the project is really large. There's a lot of jobs created and a lot more, that are going to be created over the next few years. How important was job creation in your decision, and how did that kind of differ from some of the other projects you looked at?
Oh, huge, right? Because now you already have all the jobs created and accounted for. So when you're ready to file for for the conditions to be removed, now you don't have to worry about that, right? We looked at some of the EB5 direct projects, and that was a concerning factor. That what if we're not able to employ those many or fill those many positions, and within that 2-year period, and now we don't have the compliance in place, so on and so forth, right? So record keeping, compliance, which obviously your firm and Twin Lakes as a project, we felt like, okay, you know what, this is something that I can sleep at night, not having to worry that I have not created 10 jobs yet.
Got it. That makes sense. So obviously the project is one thing, right? But the regional center is also very important in the big picture. So from that perspective, what was it like working with our team, and why did you feel comfortable, confident with EB5AN fulfilling that regional center role, compared with some of the other larger regional centers that you were considering as well?
I have 3 letters, and that is SAM. It's you, Sam, because whenever I spoke with you, again, just your professionalism, your the way you communicate, you've never forced us to sign on any project without helping us as much as you can, and letting us complete our due diligence, right? And just the overall, I guess how to put this? Yes, the overall vibes, right? I mean, that's something that you cannot explain. But whenever I spoke with you, I always felt relief that Twin Lakes is the project and EB5AN is the company that I want to invest through.
Well, thank you. I personally appreciate that, and that's one of our kind of core, foundational aspects. We want to just make sure all the available information is provided and everything's transparent, and from that, then all of our investors can make a fully, informed decision, whether it's us or someone else. I think that's just absolutely critical.
See, that's
happen.
That's a huge point that you just made, right? You never said that, oh, invest in us, otherwise I'm going to withhold all this information, right? You were ready to present the information, and it wasn't even just any of your projects. It was, you invest with us or through anybody else. These are the things you need to keep in mind, right? And then number 2, I mean, looking at your track record, your pedigree, obviously those things are important to my wife and I, and the infrastructure that you've put together, right? I mean, you can tell that you have a team of great individuals that is constantly working on getting things done. I still remember when we were getting the wire out, right? And it was the whole SVB thing, and you and your team were available for us, so that was huge.
Yes, that was definitely a busy time for sure. Great. I guess to kind of summarize it, having now gone through the source of funds, gotten your application in, adjustment of status, all of that, what would you, if you were having lunch with another friend now, having just gone through that whole process, what are some of the major pieces of advice you would share, with someone like yourself who was, considering an investment in EB5 now?
Right. First and foremost, talk to your spouse or talk to your significant other, because this is a huge, unless you have generational wealth, now that's a different story. But if you are somebody that is going to put in $800,000, talk to your significant other or your spouse, your family, because it's going to be a life-changing event, right? A life-changing decision. You might have to scale back your lifestyle, so on and so forth. Once that is taken care of, and yes, you want to now go ahead with EB5, you need to have three things in place, right? Your source of funds, a competent attorney that's always going to be available, at least during the duration of filing, right? Now, I'm not saying you call that person at 2 a.m., but at least during business hours, that person is responsive, or that law firm is responsive. They have infrastructure, they have the track record, and then so Anahita, George, and Nick would be great. And then number three would be going through a firm like EB-5AN that would then help you present a slew of options that you can invest in, right? And then obviously taking one project at a time to see completing the due diligence on each of those respective projects. Now that's more of not an afterthought, but that's more of a later on, right? But if somebody wants to work with, wants to invest in the EB5 project, I feel these three things, knowing that you have your family support is going to go a long way, because there will be conversations, you'll be second doubting yourself because it's a large amount, and then obviously an attorney that is always by you, and an EB5N type of team that's there for you would be huge as well.
And just to kind of circle back quickly to the project, right? So, if you were advising someone, when looking at a project, Twin Lakes or any other project, other than it being rural, right? What are a couple of the major things that you feel are kind of the most important things you want to look for in a potential EB5 project?
Brand name, right? Who is the builder? If it's a construction project, then who is the builder? Who is the developer? Future. It's not future. At least any data that is available to you, right? We were lucky that Twin Lakes had already kicked off, and there were sales that were actually happening at that point, right? So we saw that the uptick in sales numbers, and bookings definitely helped make it easier for us to make this decision. And I think repayment, their track record in repaying these loans or these, any type of funding for that matter, right? I believe, and Sam, you can help me here. Coulter or this Twin Lakes project also had a secondary financing already approved, right?
Yep, there's a separate bank loan, correct? Separate from
right.
EB5 financing.
Right. So that, okay, you know what, there are a set of underwriters external to this EB5 funding that have approved the project as well, right? And that they're not just purely focused on EB5. funding.
Exactly. Yep. And the way we like to position that is that, this project's already feasible, right? From a
Yes.
basic economic perspective, there's sales happening, revenues being generated, the deal's already profitable, and there's third party, truly independent institutional lending. A bank has underwritten it. Two banks actually have underwritten the project, Wells Fargo and Third Coast Bank have underwritten the project, loaned millions of dollars. So yeah, those are really important things that we're looking for when we consider a potential project.
Yes. Yes. The feasibility is huge, right?
Yes, exactly. Because unfortunately, in some other projects, where they're building a large hotel or a large apartment complex or something where, no revenue can be realized for years in the future, and it's very hard to determine, how well is this thing going to rent or be occupied eventually when it's done years into the future. It's very hard to be able to accurately predict that. But if you have sales today that are happening and you can feasibly point to those sales as, hey, this is economically, this business is making sense today, it's much easier to get comfortable with that versus a lot of assumptions that may or may not happen, years into the future.
Right. I have one more thing to add to your question, to your previous question about what I would suggest or advise somebody.
Sure.
One thing not to do is not to talk to a lot of people, and to not go on different forums and start thinking about, like, what if a project goes south or something, right? I mean, the more in this sense, and anything immigration related, I have a rule of thumb, or a best practice, that ignorance is a bliss, right? So sometimes when you start talking to a lot of people, and people with zero understanding or knowledge of EB-5, they start sort of bombarding you with negative information, and that will just make it extremely difficult to find a project and really have that conviction with the project or with an attorney's team or things of that nature, right?
Yep, exactly. You've got to get just quality advice from an experienced industry participant, an attorney, a regional center. And yeah, EB-5 is definitely complex, but there are rules, right? There is a rule book. So yeah, you just got to have a team around you that will help explain everything, and yeah, make sure you understand everything, at the beginning.
Yes, you got it.
Great. Well, listen, thank you, Rahul. I know you're busy for taking some time to chat with us, and yeah, we really appreciate it. I really appreciate it personally. And yeah, we're very happy to have you in the Twin Lakes project. And yeah, hopefully at some point in the future, we'll get to see you in person at the project.